My name is Percy Jackson.
This is Two Wise Girls podcast. We're doing an episode that actually I saw. I got the idea from somebody that is a brand new Percy Jackson podcast who I followed on I subscribe to too. Her name's Rogue Nerd, and she does mainly like reaction content videos in general, but she's been watching season 1 and she's never read the books. And she doesn't know anything about or doesn't remember anything about the Greek gods. And she was asking people if there was like a video that she could watch that gives her like information about like the Greek gods and just basic information about the Greek gods because and some of the characters without like getting spoiled for anything. And I was like, there really isn't much of that because people like forget that some people have never read the books and don't know anything. I love those people. They're so fun, but it's just they've been out for so long that we forget about them sometimes. And so I thought we could do an episode like that. Just kind of sum stuff up, and it fit because the big thing that happened in the last week was they announced the casting for the last 3 Olympians. So now we have all of them cast. Jennifer Beals is going to be Demeter.
Yes.
The one that everyone's making the same joke about. The kid that they cast as Apollo, his name is Hubert, and he has one singular credit on IMDb besides this. And why does his picture look like it's a prison photo?
Yeah, it looks like a mugshot.
Yeah, it's so weird. I'm like, why does it look like a mugshot? And everyone was saying the same thing.
For Apollo, but
yeah, and it's one of those people like we forgot that. I wasn't really thinking about it, honestly. I didn't think too much about Apollo, but Apollo's supposed to look like a teenager, and that told me that he was somebody in on TikTok. In COVID times, he was one of those people making thirst trap videos, which is so funny. I hope that they make fun of him a lot for that because I saw some kids posting them after I figured that out, and they're definitely cringy. He was one of those people that made videos like that during COVID and then just disappeared. I'm sure as a way to try to get an agent and things like that. But the big one, of course, is that I'm saying last is Ming-Na Wen is playing Hera, and I was like, I have to like Hera now. I have to like Hera now. I love her so much. You have a problem if you don't love her. She's amazing. She's been in almost every nerdy sort of big franchise. Basically, she's getting around to all of them.
Was she the voice of Mulan? Is that why she looked familiar to me? Okay,
yes, she was the voice of Mulan. She was in the Joy Luck Club. She was in Star Wars. She was on The Mandalorian, I think, in Star Wars. And I'm pretty sure that she did voices for characters in the Clone Wars TV shows or Rebels or both. I can't remember right now, but I'm pretty sure that she did that too. And she's been in a lot of things. She's just really cool. So I was like, okay. It's physically impossible for me to not like her, and so I'm somehow gonna be on Hera's side. But it does make me think that it was I thought it was a very strategic casting choice to make her Hera because everybody likes her. Yes. And so it's gonna make us give her more of a chance by having somebody like her play her instead. It does also just for people still worried about more seasons after season 3, that does give me a lot of confidence that they're sure that season 4 is going to happen because Hera has a much bigger role in season 4, and there's no conceivable way on this planet that they're going to cast Ming-Na and have her be in 1 scene, 2 scenes maybe at the most in season 3, and that's it. They would have to be I don't even know what. They would have to be like delusional in order to do that. And so I'm sure they're not. Um, but yeah, that was the main stuff that people were talking about this week. That was fun. I will forever think that it's funny that Hubert looks like he's taking a mugshot photo and he's been arrested by Disney. I don't know what happened that that's the picture that they ended up with because he was like he like modeled.
Yeah. Like, you guys
I
very clearly could have taken another photo, like, off of his Instagram feed or something. But, okay, we'll go with the mugshot.
Yeah, and the thing about it that I will say that having somebody who used to be like an influencer and a model be Apollo feels exactly accurate for
Kind of on brand.
him. Okay, so the one like caveat to this that isn't a god that I wanted to mention before you start talking about all the gods is that
Mm-hmm.
Rogner asked about Medusa because
Oh, okay.
she did her episode 3 reaction, so of course I watched some of it and commented on it, and she asked in the comments like, oh, what's her whole thing? And so since I'm the Medusa person, I'll just sum up really quickly that there's the basic thing with Medusa, if you've ever been curious too, besides this person, is that there's two Medusa myths basically that are like the prevailing ones, I guess, that have
Mm-hmm.
like at least survived at this point. There's one that she was a Gorgon, which is kind of like a monster in the Greek mythology world, and that Perseus went to go kill her because the gods told him that he could get his mom back if he did that. And so he goes and kills her, and it's just like she's just a Gorgon, a monster. They kill her and take her head and use her powers to go kill more people. And that's like the end of it, that she's not
Yeah.
seen as like a sympathetic figure at all. She's just like a villain person. And then there's the other myth that people like a lot more, of the idea that maybe she wasn't always a Gorgon, maybe she was actually like kind of like a normal person, and she was somebody who kind of like worshipped in that way. And if you believed in like the Greek gods in that time,
Mm-hmm.
Athena and and Poseidon and her was not consensual, which it would never be. He's a god and she's not. No matter what version of the story happens, she's not a god. That can never really be. That's all. It's more about how she realizes that he raped her, and then Athena gets mad that happened to her, basically like blaming her, and turns her into a Gorgon. There's some
I
versions
have
of it
more
that
to
say that like Athena was doing it to like protect her or
Yeah.
something by giving her these powers. I don't think that
It
anyone
doesn't
would ever
matter.
actually do that. I just don't
So,
think that
okay.
anyone would do that for like rape victims because people don't like us. Like it's
No,
generally.
but to give more detail to what Shannon's saying, so the version that's she was a monster. She may have had a relationship with Poseidon in some way that angered Athena. Athena punished her. Um, but okay, sorry, hold on. So there's Hesiod's Theogony, which is the one I will say it is a good read if you want to know the entire history of the gods, but at the same time a lot of people will treat it like a Greek mythology Bible, and so I get uncomfortable recommending it sometimes, but that's where the original Medusa myth comes from when you hear people say that. And that's she laid with Poseidon in a field. Um, Perseus was sent to destroy her, blah blah blah. Where you get the more humanized version is Ovid. And Ovid said, and here's where this part gets muddled in with the modern feminist take. Not that I would even say that Ovid's wasn't like groundbreaking for his time to think of a victim in this way, but His version is that Medusa was a beautiful woman who got raped in Athena's temple, and that's why Athena turned her into the Gorgon, is because she was mad that her temple got desecrated, especially because she is a virginal goddess. And I guess Poseidon's on a playing field where she couldn't punish him, so she punished Medusa. And I'm going to defend what Shannon says about Medusa being a Gorgon not being on the same level, because I'm sure there's going to be some people, well, it's another immortal, you know, like they're kind of the same. Monsters are never treated the same. They're not. Even Medusa being an older monster than an Olympian, because those are essentially the people that got thrown into Tartarus with the other Titans after the first Titan War. So, and if they didn't, you know, it was begrudgingly so. So I wouldn't say she had, you know, any sort of power over Poseidon in any way. I wouldn't even call them peers in that case. So then the feminists took that, and in the 70s with some feminist movements, I believe it was in either a poem or a short story, someone added on the detail that Medusa was a beautiful woman who was a priestess of Athena. And so Athena wasn't doing it to harm her when she turned her into a Gorgon. She gave her a means of protecting herself, which is a modern feminist take, I will say. But regardless, the idea of her being this victim and of that victimhood being something that leads to this monstrosity, you know, or this power, is still empowering, even if you're just looking at the Ovid version. Which is why we're kind of just like, you know, there's multiple myths, but we like this one.
Yeah. And just the basic idea is people like her story, like me, because she sees like the curse that was given to her as something actually good, because now it's something that she can use to protect herself from people like Poseidon. This is why I don't like Poseidon and Percy Jackson, and never, ever, ever will. Never.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care if the TV show is trying to, like, make him seem nicer with Sally to, like, backtrack that. Like, you can't do an episode about Medusa being raped by him and then expect me to ever care about anything he ever says. And so to have you go through the different gods, we can just start off with, you know, Big Daddy Zeus, since he's technically number one.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I might go a little bit before Zeus just because I feel like you need to get the succession in there. And, like, to briefly go over the line of succession is you have primordial gods. These are the forces that created the universe, all of that. And that leads to kind of the first king god, so to speak, which is Uranus. He is kind of my gosh, if I could talk. He is representative of the sky, and he has, you know, all of the Titan children with Gaia, who's representative of Earth. And so you can see like super early artwork of some of this, because part of what happens in this particular instance is the man smothers Earth and does not allow her to give birth, like does not let go of smothering her. And so you can see artists representing it as like literally a man smushing himself against a woman kind of thing. And so Uranus and Gaia, they have all these children. He's basically like preventing her from giving birth. I don't want to get too graphic, but the idea is basically keeping the entrance sealed. And so she gets fed up. She eventually schemes with her youngest, and her youngest being Kronos, gives him a scythe. Kronos is able to cut off his dad's genitals. That's one reason that, or one of the myths of how Aphrodite came to be. I can't remember if Rick Riordan goes Aphrodite is a daughter of Zeus, or if she's like this branch of the Titan. But in one version of the myth, Kronos cuts off Uranus's genitals. Those land on the ground and then go into the sea. The sea foam turns into Aphrodite. But after Kronos, he found out when he started having children with another Titan, Rhea, that he was doomed to have a child who would succeed him. And so his big plan when he found that out was, I'm just going to eat all of my children as they come out. So he didn't prevent Rhea from giving birth. She gave birth, and then he swallowed the baby's whole. Or there's a very famous painting that I'm sure you'll be able to find very easily, where it looks like he's actually literally eating them piece by piece. But he does this until he also gets to the youngest child. And at this point, Rhea's fed up. She wants a baby. She wants to actually keep a baby at this point. And so she schemes with, I believe it actually was Gaia that she schemed with, to hide the baby. And so when Zeus is born, he's taken off to a mountain, and Uranus is given a rock instead. And eventually Zeus grows up, on this mountainside stuff, and he goes and takes over from his father. And his father, he tricks him into swallowing some mustardy thing, and then he throws up the rest of his children. And so the Olympians then are kind of, they have two birth orders when you really think about it, because they have the birth order they were actually born in, and then the order in which they emerged from Kronos. And so Zeus is technically the oldest in that second lineup, because he never really did emerge from Kronos. But they're all regurgitated back up, and that is the first round of Olympians. And I believe specifically that would be Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, thinking who else would count, Hades. Zeus eventually goes on to have some children of his own after that. But to round off Zeus, he is the king of the gods. After he takes this seat of power from his dad, he is almost usurped himself. He gets a prophecy of your wife is going to have a kid who's going to take over from you. And he prevents that by swallowing the wife. So the wife was already pregnant at this point. And because she was already pregnant, she does still somewhat give birth, although Zeus is given the credit. He has a splitting headache, which, depending on the version, Hephaestus is the one to help him out with. Knocks him on the head. Out pops Athena, fully formed. So that basically broke the whole thing of succession. Zeus never really had any other son that would have been powerful enough to take over from him from there. He marries Hera, who is another one of the Olympians. Hera is in mythology mostly just portrayed as very jealous. She is a goddess of marriage, and older women kind of. If you think of Artemis as being a goddess of younger women, then Hera is probably when they cross over into marriage age. And so with her and Zeus's marriage, Zeus likes to go around with other mortals, with other titans, with other gods, with all of the Nereids and stuff. He has a ton of extramarital affairs, and Hera gets mad, but since she can't punish her husband, she usually goes after the woman and the baby. And so a lot of stories you'll hear of Hera are of her doing really, really mean and spiteful shit to random mortals that just have the misfortune of being Zeus's child. I also have been in a situation where I stayed with a cheater before, and I can tell you that experience, if you're not prepared to forgive, it's it stays with you constantly. And it is one of those things that does drive you crazy. It really grates on your mind and how you feel about yourself and stuff. So I would love an interpretation where she gets more sympathy, and nobody ever agrees with me on this one. And it's okay if you don't. But I do think that there's a story to be told in that she's this wife getting constantly cheated on who has to stay with a guy. She has no other choice. So, what can she do? And, I get it. I also get why she's wrong. But I feel like we need that story.
Yeah, we do. We need a story that talks about people like Hera that are just stuck in a relationship, like legitimately can't leave, and
Yeah.
the like things they do inside their minds to just survive, being that unhappy, not in a way to like lessen what they do, but just to like point
Hmm.
out that that does happen to some people, and it sucks. But they are like still going through really bad stuff too, even when they're attacking children.
Yes.
Okay, the next one would be
So
Poseidon.
yeah, Poseidon. I was thinking like house order. So Poseidon
Hmm.
is again a sibling of Hera and Zeus, and the three big gods that Percy Jackson speaks of are Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. And after they took over from the Titans, they drew lots to see who gets dominion over what parts of the world. Zeus got the sky, Poseidon got the sea, and Hades got the underworld. And so Poseidon rules over the sea, and basically think of any water that channels out of the sea, less so fresh water, although you'll notice in Percy Jackson lore especially that they acknowledge the connection between the different types of water and stuff, and that you can somewhat negotiate the whole seawater freshwater thing. That's a unique to Percy Jackson thing. I do think that it was also recognized that they were somewhat connected, but Poseidon's just god of the sea. Some of his mythology does include having like a royal family under the sea, a son Triton, a daughter, I think her name's Amphitrite, but I might be remembering that wrong. And let's see, besides that, he's also father to a bunch of heroes, which is on brand for Percy Jackson. He's uh let's see, we talked about the Medusa myth. That's one of the major myths. There is the rivalry with Athena that's also mentioned in Percy Jackson. It's part of why Annabeth at first is like tenuous about building a connection with Percy, is because their parents are rivals. Poseidon, it's interesting. He's considered a god of earthquakes along with the sea, which shows that they kind of had somewhat of an understanding of tectonic plates, that they were underwater and like water could affect it, kind of thing. And then he is also somewhat dominion over storms. And I think that that's probably the idea, that when you're out at sea for a very long time and there's a storm, it feels like everything's working against you. So I'm sure that that came from these seafaring people, where that's how they had to journey. And they're like, all of this feels like Poseidon's fault.
I don't remember who Cabin 4 is.
Cabin 4, I believe, was Demeter.
Okay.
We'll go with Demeter. So Demeter is, she should have been counted. She's one that Kronos swallowed. So that was the one I was forgetting. She is the goddess of the harvest, and the way that I was taught about this was, you think of her as more the grainy harvest, whereas Dionysus is the wet harvest, or like fruits and stuff like that. She's usually represented with like wheat and corn and things that I'm allergic to. So kind of the big mythology around her usually has to do with her relationship with her daughter, which is my specialty, because, I have seen someone give this a more favorable interpretation, which I'll talk about in a second. But essentially, she had a daughter with Zeus at one point named Persephone. And Persephone was her pride and joy. She loved this little girl. They were always together, most of the time anyway. But one day, Persephone went out on her own to go pick out flowers with some friends. In at least one version of the myth, I've seen that those friends being Artemis and Athena, and like other virginal young goddesses. But she was out, picking flowers with other girlies, and the earth opened up and swallowed her. And turns out that her father Zeus had promised her hand to Hades, and they decided to do this all on their own, knowing Demeter wouldn't go with it because she wouldn't be able to see her daughter again. Just took her while she was out in the field, and this caused Demeter extreme sadness. She stopped letting plants grow. She went off into hiding, and she disguised herself as an old woman and nannied a baby, but nannied him in a way where when the parents went to sleep at night, she tried to make him immortal by putting him in fire. And one night they caught her. And so the family freaks out. She ends up leaving and saying, "You guys got to build me a temple now. And he's never going to be immortal, but he's going to be a great man." Yeah. So after that, the gods keep trying to negotiate the return of Persephone. Like, let's get the crops going. All the humans are going to die. Nobody's going to sacrifice to us. What are you doing, girl? And so they finally decide they're going to get Persephone back for her. But Hades, knowing that he doesn't want to lose his wife, decides to feed her some pomegranates in the underworld. Because she ate underworld food, she is obligated to go back. And so that's where we get the idea of the seasons, which is when Persephone is away, Demeter is sad, all of the plants die. Some people interpret that as summer, some people interpret that as winter. And then when Demeter and Persephone are together, she lets everything grow again. Now, the favorable interpretation of this whole thing is that this is a mom standing up against a dad in an arranged marriage situation, right? That she was with her daughter on, "You're not going to want to be married to this person," and that's why she was so sad and so angry. And that is one interpretation. The other interpretation that I think a lot of people have globbed onto, including myself, is because a lot of us are going to therapy for our parental issues, and that is the idea that she was enmeshed with Persephone, and that maybe they needed that space from each other, especially because it comes from a Homeric hymn, but there's this one part in the Homeric hymn to Demeter where they tell this story that Hades promises Persephone, like, everybody's going to obey you, you're going to have the best life down here, and you're going to have power, kind of thing. Where I see that as, like, yes, she may not have gotten into that situation in the best circumstances, but it actually sounds like a good situation for her, if you really think about it, because where else is she going to have that kind of power? Mm-hmm. It's certainly not back being her mom's little, little best friends.
Yeah. What I usually say about Persephone is there can be, both myths can be this, like, exist at the same time. Like, people act like it's an either or, but I don't think it has to be. Like, you can think that they wrote this storyline of Demeter getting so upset to show, like, what women felt like about arranged marriages at the time, even though they make her sound ridiculous, and like over the top with it is by what I mean by ridiculous, but you can still think that she has a justifiable reason for being upset that her daughter got stuck in an arranged marriage, while also thinking that it might have actually been good for her daughter at the same time. Even if it was, like, societally not the best practice, it might have ended up being okay for her because it forced separation from her mom that she normally wouldn't be able to get. That's our very nuanced way of looking at her that most people probably won't like, but I don't care.
I hate kids. All of them. I hate my own kids. Maybe less than other kids, but still not fond of them.
Yes, so Ares is a son of Hera and Zeus. One of the few that's actually, like a son of the king and queen. He is a god of war. And a lot of times in Greek mythology especially, he's kind of thought of as this idea of bloodlust and, like, think of being super entrenched in battle, like covered in blood, fully angry, your sword and your shield, and you're just feeling powerful. That's the kind of feeling that Ares is supposed to kind of represent. And this gets a little muddied in in Rick Riordan lore, especially because he does mix in Roman, and the Romans thought very differently of Mars, their Ares equivalent, because he was one of their founder gods, versus in Greece, he doesn't really play as important a role to their society as a whole. So they kind of he's kind of the uglier sides of war. He literally rides into war with his son's pain and panic. If you've seen, you know, if you've seen, what is it called? Disney's Hercules. The two people that are with Hades, they're actually supposed to be Ares' sons. And yeah, he rides into battle, basically making people afraid, making people angry, arousing that bloodlust and all of the emotions that could come up on the battlefield. I won't get too much more into Mars versus Ares, other than just to say he's a lot more calculated and less emotional in the Roman equivalent. And I do think that Rick Riordan brings some of that to his Ares, whereas, you know, like traditional Greek mythology, Ares in the Iliad, for example, he gets his ass beat a couple times because he's on the Trojan side. So that's what they thought of him. Let's see. Cabin 6 is Athena, which Athena, I already mentioned her birth story a little bit. Zeus's first wife, Metis, which means, I believe it means mind or thoughts, something like that. She gets swallowed by Zeus because there's a prophecy she's going to give birth to a child that will overthrow Zeus. Athena springs from his head, fully formed, and she ends up being a goddess of warfare, different than Ares in that she seems to be more of the strategy side. I also have referred to her in the past as kind of like a genderqueer idea because of this, because I can't remember what source material this came from, but she fully wanted to be like this because she's like, I don't want to grow up and get married and be a mom. I want to be like this forever and be on the battlefield with you, Dad. And he says, okay. So there's an aspect to it of her denying certain parts of her womanhood. So yeah, they make her this kind of cold, calculated warfare goddess. And then alongside with that, she is a goddess of the arts. And like it's hard to summarize it in just weaving, because being a person who sews and crochets and all of those things too, there's patterns, there's math. It's all very, very calculated. And so it's hard for me to imagine that she wouldn't be involved in basically every craft there is. But it's something about the planning of it specifically. And when you think of weaving back in the day where they had these huge looms and they were making tapestries that had pictures and things like that, you're really planning out where each stitch goes. And so that's the kind of energy that Athena brings to the table. And that's what we end up seeing from her children in Percy Jackson, where it is this very quick thinking, like always coming up with a new way of making this row of stitches look the best, metaphorically speaking, but, you know, making everything happen in a way where it's perfect. And Annabeth gets caught in this trap a few times. Especially, I love how the show represents it more than anything, of like she's trying so hard to be perfect and then it doesn't always work because she's also immortal. But that's kind of why Athena ends up being this kind of perfect figure to have Annabeth be struggling to please her mom all the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
And
wait. Since we're talking about this in a Rick Riordan context, he has, I believe he has at some point answered interviews as to why he decided to make the virginal Athena one of the goddesses that gives birth. The in Percy Jackson lore explanation is she finds a really smart person and then she latches onto them and they have an idea baby too, like Zeus did.
One thing I wanted to say about that I always think is funny, because I don't like Athena at all in Percy Jackson, at least. The concept of how she talks about, like, how she, like, finds somebody that like intellectually like challenges her and she really likes talking to them, and that's the person that she ends up like creating this like baby from like them like bonding almost over like the intellectual or like cerebral connection. That's basically what asexual people do.
Mhm.
That's like how what we think is great, and where we think all of our connections come from is from that, which is why we can recognize when people are good looking, but it doesn't really matter to us in that way, one way or another. It's like the mental connection that means more. And I just think it's one of those weird things that Athena gives a good example of that. She can There's no like one way or another. Those concepts didn't really exist back then, but it does get a good example if you're looking for someone, if you're asexual or especially if you're aromantic, and you're trying to explain that to somebody. That is a good
Mhm.
example of it because that is what we do. Um,
Yeah.
okay, the next cabin is Apollo, Mugshot Boy.
Okay. So, yes, Mugshot Boy. So Apollo and Artemis are twins. And they are the children of Zeus, and I believe she was actually a Titan named Leto. And Leto, she she was prevented from giving birth by Hera. She was one of there's a couple cases of this. And so she had to basically travel all over to give birth to her children to try to find a place. Everybody was like, Hera's mad at you, girlie. You gotta get away from here. You can't have your kids here. And okay, so Rick Riordan makes his Apollo older than Artemis. It's not specified necessarily in most of the myths, although there is one myth about Artemis that I love because one of her dominions is childbirth, that she is the older twin and she helped with the birth of Apollo. Um, and so I wanted to mention that just because I think that that's a cooler story for Artemis. I'm kind of a little sad Rick didn't go with that version, but he likes to play on the big brother thing with Apollo, and so that's why he chose it that way.
Hmm.
Apollo, they also explain this in Titan's Curse. Apollo's dominion, you can think of it as a couple different ways. There's music, diseases, medicine in some respects, um, prophecy, and then the big one that like kind of is explained in Percy Jackson is sun and heat kind of things. Um, Part of it is that people, there's a lot of gods to keep track of. So yeah, Helios used to do the job, but I guess now Apollo does it. At some point, those two got conflated, and he absorbed Helios's duties, so he has that sun bit. He's known to be, hanging around with his lyre, which is a stringed instrument for anybody doesn't know, and um, has a lot of affairs. He's very, very, very sensual. He likes both men and women too, which is a lot of reasons why people like his mythology. Um, let's see. I think what else. He's usually bow and arrow, which is why his kids are seen with bows and arrows, and I believe also have powers that makes them better bow and arrow shooters. So we could jump into Artemis, who
Hmm.
doesn't have any children because she is also a virginal goddess, usually represented as a little girl even in ancient times. So she was wearing a type of, I believe chiton is the name of the garment, where it's like much shorter. And I also like to think of her as somewhat genderqueer because her thing is going around and hunting small animals. And that's not necessarily the most feminine thing to do either. And so part of me is like, she almost to me has the energy of a little girl who wants to be one of the boys.
Well,
Like she loves being outdoorsy, loves doing outdoorsy things.
the thing I will say about that it's hard. I don't like it whenever people say something is masculine or feminine because I always think according to who. Um,
Yeah.
because thousands of years in indigenous tribes, they were all run by women, and the women were the ones that got all of the food, and the men would go out and try to find things and usually fail.
Yeah.
And so if you talk to people like from cultures like that, they would think that that's an inherently very feminine thing to do. It's
Yeah.
our like a white European way of looking at things, as women are like not supposed to be like that. I don't know. And so that's why I don't know. I never know what to think about Artemis and her idea of gender, because even in the old like mythology stories, it's very like jaded. Like that one, there's the one myth where she sees somebody seeing her when she's like naked or whatever, when she's like cleaning herself in a river. And so she turns that person into a girl because it's magically okay if a girl is staring at you when you're naked. And just that story alone, I'm just like, there's like 10 things in that story that I don't agree with. When it comes to all those things, like gender things, like the idea that like it's okay if a woman does that, that's still really creepy and weird, even if a woman is doing that, even if they're doing it on accident, like in that story. Like, what do you mean it's okay now that she's a girl? That's definitely not okay if she's a girl. But yeah, I don't know. But Artemis is very much like everyone thinks of her, at least especially Percy Jackson land, as like the huntress, and in connection with the moon. And kind of,
Yes.
she's like a weird scapegoat in a lot of mythology, that when a little girl dies and they have no justification for it, they're like, oh, Artemis did it for really vague reasons that don't make any sense.
Yeah, so okay, there's so many myths about her that paint her in such a weird light. There's that one, and so she does have hunters, like a group of girls that she goes around and hunts with, although it wasn't so gender segregated, because there's a whole play that we won't get into because it's very awful if you're ace, but a guy who wanted to join Artemis, go hunt with her, and he had her favor. He wanted to, like, write off love. I'm never going to fall in love. I'm going to be a devotee of Artemis and go join her. And Aphrodite ends up punishing her, or punishing this dude. So we don't have to get into that one, but just to say there's weird random myths. Another weird random one is that, Agamemnon, who was a leader of the Greek army during the Trojan War, pissed her off at some point, and she demanded he sacrifice her daughter, which people read that and are like, why would she want a little girl sacrifice? Which they said even back then, because I forget which tragedian wrote a play where she gets like switched at the last second, and she gets switched for a deer. So there's some versions of the myth where people are even like, yeah, this doesn't make sense. Artemis must have switched her with a deer at the last second. Yeah, so she's somewhat mysterious in that way. She absorbed Selene's duties, similar to Helios and Apollo. Also known to shoot with a bow and arrow, which I think goes along with the fact that she's usually considered like a huntress of small game. I would say the biggest, well, I mean, small game, yes, but there's also the Callisto story where she says she would hunt a bear. So maybe not necessarily small game. Maybe she was a better shot than people give her credit for if she was able to take down bears.
Probably.
Yes. But yeah, and honestly, on the note that you said about the hunting and the masculine feminine thing, a lot of our views of the ancient world have been tainted by early British people, mostly, that found some of this stuff or translated some of this stuff and put their own cultural lenses on things. So I might be wrong there. There might have been a lot of women who hunted small game for their family and stuff like that, especially when they were younger. So I do think that there's a specific aspect of girlhood, though, that she represents where, you just want to play outside. You don't care about being super feminine. You don't care about like all of these things that society later puts on you about femininity. And that's why I tend to think of her as a different type of genderqueer than even Athena.
Yeah, I can understand that, sort of. I don't know. I can understand that, but at the same time, I don't understand her always wanting to stay a little girl, because that's terrifying to me. That's because my childhood was really special. So, the next cabin is Hephaestus.
Okay, so Hephaestus, there's two different explanations. Sometimes he's Zeus's son, sometimes he's not. In the explanation where he is not, Hera got jealous when Athena was born, that Zeus was bragging that he made a baby all by himself, didn't need a woman, regardless of the fact that he swallowed his first wife, and she was already pregnant. And yes, you did need a woman, sir. With Hera, she got jealous, was like, I'm going to try to make a baby on my own. And of course, because of misogyny, the myth goes that the baby she made was imperfect. It was somehow born deformed. And that's why Hephaestus is the god who has this physical deformity. And then there's other versions where later, like, she gets mad at him, she throws him off of Olympus, he gets raised on Mount Ida was Zeus. I believe it's Mount Etna for Hephaestus. I might be getting those wrong. He was raised on some other mountain after he was thrown off. And Lemnos, that's where he was raised. Okay, sorry. And let's see. In the versions where he is Zeus's child as well, it's sometimes even Zeus that threw him off the mountain. A lot of his story, though, goes along those lines of being unlovable because he's deformed. I hate it. I hate that is it. That disability, like, even just physical disability was enough that people were mean to him, that his own mom was mean to him, that his wife didn't love him back. So a big myth, and this one I'll say because it comes up in the show, is that at one point he got mad at Hera for not being a loving mother. And so he built this golden throne for her that turned out to be a trap, strapping Hera down. She can't get up. They literally call every other Olympian to try to save her and, like, get her out of this chair. Nobody can do it. They offer up a reward saying, hey, if you get Hera out of the chair, you can marry Aphrodite. Nobody can do it. Aphrodite thought Ares was a sure win. She wanted to be with Ares. She was like, of course he's going to be able to do this. And she even thought, like, if he can't do it, he'll storm Hephaestus and he'll beat Hephaestus up and get it for you. Like, she somehow thought he was going to win. And I believe it was Hermes that ended up going to Hephaestus. It was either Hermes or Dionysus, because I feel like there was alcohol involved in the story. And they loosened him up and they're like, okay, look, nobody can get Hera out. If you do this, you get Aphrodite as your wife. So go down there, buddy. And so he does free her, and that's how he ends up married to Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Now, Hephaestus's duties are very much being the smith god. He also has some volcano kind of things to his aspect, but he is the one who builds things for the Olympians, along with some cyclopes that Zeus has that make his bolts. He's kind of, I would even think of him as being maybe even in charge of those people. But that's why we see the Hephaestus kids in Percy Jackson are mainly, your tool makers and your tinkerers in the workshops kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. I do, one thing that people might not like, but it is very true, is the whole thing about Hephaestus being cast out because he's disabled. That's that's a thing. But there's a day every year that disabled people advocated to get that just talks about the amount of people that are killed by their parents because they don't want to take care of them anymore. And Hephaestus on the show, I have to always mention that Timothy Olmanson plays Hephaestus on the TV show, which is amazing because he's actually disabled in real life because he had a stroke a couple years ago. People mostly know him like I do as Lassiter on Psych.
Yeah,
and I didn't know that he had a stroke until I saw an article and I watched the first season that he had a stroke where the one of half, I can't remember, it was the left or right half of his body is just like numb or whatever you would call it, like he can't move that half of his body. And so in episode 5, when Hephaestus has like a cane and he's like holding
Hmm.
on to like the barrier thing when he's talking to Annabeth, that's just like Timothy Oldmanson, and he was like very happy that they let him play this role with the, you know, accommodations that he would need to play
Hmm.
Hephaestus. But it is pretty, I still think that's one of the most amazing things they did on the show was
Yeah.
cast somebody who's actually physically disabled to play a god who is physically disabled. That, name one other time in
Seriously,
Hollywood, name
such a
one other
bad job.
time. Name one other time you've had an act like a character that is physically disabled actually played by somebody who is, when they could have just picked somebody else. They could have just picked
Yeah.
anyone to play that, but they picked him, which I still really, really like that they did that. Okay, the
Wait, before we move on from Hephaestus, at one point I did try to look up what his physical disability was because it's generally mentioned that like his legs don't work very well. And it kind of just seems like maybe the idea they were going for was that his legs were somehow underdeveloped. That like they don't have the muscle tone and they're smaller. Although there is a lot of artwork, ancient artwork, where Hephaestus is just depicted totally normally. So it's one of those interesting things where like I think they had trouble even trying to depict a god as disabled because of their view of disabilities. I mean, their version of early detection wasn't early detection. It was, oh, this baby is born and looks off. Like let's leave it out for exposure.
yeah,
Um, yeah, so he does kind of in a sense represent that same idea. It's just now we have early detection. And I even remember, 14 years ago when I was pregnant with William, very early on, them being like talking about some sort of test you could get for Down syndrome. I think it was an amniocentesis back then, which I don't know if it still was or it still is. But like I remember them making a big deal of offering it before I was done with the first trimester, even of like we can find this out, pretty quickly if we want to. And it's like a nice to know thing, but no, thank you.
yeah. My sister was pregnant about 3 years ago, and there was a genetic testing thing. I forget when she did it, but it was at least a couple months in where they tested for a lot of different things. I don't think that that's a bad thing to do if you're going to have a
Hmm.
child that's disabled. It's always a good idea to be able to do a lot of research and things like that before they're born so that you're prepared. But it is also a good thing to always remind people that if you're getting pregnant and having a baby, that includes the idea that you could have a baby that's disabled. And if you don't
Yeah,
think that you want a baby that's disabled, don't have a baby. Because that can
pretty
always
much.
happen. Like, disability is the number one. This is like the thing to say, what people always say, is that we're the one group of people that you can, at any point in your life, you can join. Like, everyone is
Yes.
going to join one day. We're both I've been disabled forever. Um, we're both disabled, and like everyone ends up disabled at some point. I think it's so funny what people don't think is a disability because they just think disability is bad. Like, there is one of the best TikTok creators, Carches and Spice. She did this whole series where she just talked about things that are a disability, like glasses are like you needing glasses is a disability. You can't see without them. And
Yeah.
people were like, "Oh, is my asthma a disability?" And I was like losing my mind watching these videos because I was like, we can't breathe. Like, I have asthma. Like, I can't
Yeah.
go outside in the summertime. If there's like smoke around, I can't breathe. Yeah, that's a disability. What do you mean that's not a God? Okay, anyway.
Yeah.
Um the next cabin is Aphrodite.
Aphrodite. So yeah, I talked about one of her origins already, which is that she was the cutoff. castrated your genitals of Uranus. And again, I don't remember which one Rick Riordan goes with, but Homer actually goes with the idea that she is a daughter of Zeus and Dione, which sometimes I remember a teacher telling me that could very easily just be a feminine spelling of Zeus. But there also is a Titan mentioned named Dione at some point, so it could be either. And her role is love, beauty, and all of let's see, love and beauty is kind of the big things. I feel like all love goddesses used to have somewhat of a war affiliation, and that happens more in her mythology than in her dominion, where like the Trojan War was almost exactly her fault. But you know, like she is this very, very beautiful, very seductress type of goddess. A lot of times her involvement in myths is making somebody fall in love with someone else, or you know, like trying to help the hero out by inspiring a woman to fall in love with him and help him. That's generally what she does. And so Rick Riordan very much interprets this as like, you know, kind of the popular girls in school. We have to remember he's a middle school teacher, so he's probably thinking when girls first get into like makeup and doing their nails and having boyfriends and stuff, they're very much is kind of, I think that's the connection he was building on, was, you know, realizing that there's a point where, you know, especially hetero girls, and they're like 12, 13 years old, where all of this stuff becomes vastly, vastly important to them. And so that's how Rick Riordan sort of represents the Aphrodite kids. Yeah, but like I said, in myths, mostly what she ends up doing is she ends up conspiring to help or harm heroes, usually through means of love or stuff like that. She also does this with the help of her son, Cupid, who most of us know who Cupid is, kind of usually depicted as a cherub type figure with wings and a bow. And in fact, there's even one myth where Cupid gets mad or gets in a fight with Apollo, and Apollo's like, I'm definitely the better archer. And so Cupid's like, oh, do you want to bet? And he shoots Apollo with one of his love arrows. And then he shoots this one nymph, Daphne, with a hate arrow, or like an ick arrow. And so Apollo wants to pursue her. She immediately gets the ick from Apollo and runs and runs and runs until she begs for help and she gets turned into a tree. Which is probably where the idea for Thalia came up. But yeah, so in the same way that Aphrodite and Cupid can inspire love, there also is somewhat of this idea of they can inspire the opposite of love or take love away.
I do think it's interesting that they chose Kate McKinnon to play Aphrodite, because she is more...
Yes.
Like, what is the word I'm looking for? She's more androgynous, I guess. Because they keep showing the female characters in a better light so far. And she's definitely one that could be shown as... I still love the idea of her being somebody that loves love so much that she, like, is so excited by it that she is overdramatic in that way about it.
Yes.
That doesn't have to be, like, a negative thing. Sometimes that is just, like, the fun of it. And I think that's what she enjoys and is excited watching that no matter what. But, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see, like, how she comes across. I don't like Aphrodite at all, because it's everything that makes me feel like I'm not a person. But I am going to, like, at least give them a chance to try to make her adaptation of it not that bad. The next cabin is Hermes.
Okay, so Hermes is son of Zeus and then a Titan named Maya. And that's why in the the show and in the books, the sandals come out, or the wings come out of the sandals when he says Maya. That's the connection there. Hermes has been a trickster since day one. So literally his first day on Earth, he decides to go sneak out and take some of Apollo's cattle and cook one of them, like literally as an infant. And then Apollo catches him, and Hermes, this is in one of the Homeric hymns specifically. Hermes, like, when Apollo's like, hey, baby, you took my cattle. He's like, I'm just a baby. How could I take your cattle? I don't even know what cattle is. I just know my mom's breast and the comfort of my crib. What are you talking about? And he was fully just bullshitting Apollo. The way he smooths it over is he invents the lyre for Apollo, and Apollo's like, oh, you made me an instrument? Okay, we're cool, bro. Just don't do it again. But that's the energy that Hermes came in with. Now, Hermes is the messenger god, and as the messenger god, one thing that Rick Riordan especially likes to exploit is he can go everywhere. It's not just the mortal world. He can even go into the underworld just fine on his own. And it's because he has that job of delivering messages and sometimes even delivering souls to the underworld. So he has that. Along with being a messenger god, he's a trickster god, as shown by that story of his first day on Earth. He's the god of thieves, the god of travelers, the god of merchants. Just think of everything that would be possible with roadways. He kind of has somewhat of a dominion over. And so we see all of those traits. My favorite, and one thing that William laughs at every time it comes up in the books, is the Stoll brothers being sons of Hermes and their last name being Stoll, and they like to loot and also do tricks on people. They're giving off more Hermes energy than somebody like Luke, who is kind of our main Hermes kid.
The next cabin is Dionysus.
Excuse me? I'm Percy Jackson. I'm new here.
Peter Johnson is here!
Dionysus. He is a son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Semele. And Semele is one of those weird situations where Zeus had a lot more consent than normal. She somewhat knew she was having an affair with Zeus. He didn't come to her in his true form, which is where the whole true form thing comes out in Percy Jackson lore. But he came in some like form where she could interact with him. She was happy with him. She got pregnant. But then her sisters started sowing seeds of doubt in her. And were like, are you sure you're hooking up with Zeus? Are you sure it's not just some random guy that's coming around and some nobody? And so they tell her, you should ask Zeus to show you one of his lightning bolts in his true form. And so she tells, or she asks for this, knowing that Zeus has already sweared on the river Styx he would give her anything she asked for. And so he's like, I mean, I have to now. And so he does. He shows her a lightning bolt, shows her his true form. The girl disintegrates, but luckily Zeus is able to save the baby. And so in order to fully gestate Dionysus, who at that point was not viable, he sews him into his thigh. And so, like, you can find vases, old ancient vases, where there's like a baby half sticking out of his leg and stuff. Because this idea, and I think one of his epithets is the sewn-in god. But that's his birth story. He becomes the god of another fertility god, and this is where the wet, dry fertility thing I said with Demeter comes in, where he's, you know, usually associated with grapes, but kind of, I think of the juicy fruits, you know, like anything that has a lot of juice and that kind of stuff, which is also why the strawberries are doing so well in Camp Half-Blood. That's one of the reasons they give anyways. So yeah, he is the goddess of the harvest in the same way of grapes. And then he also has this idea of madness, because of course alcohol, what happens when you drink it? You end up having a little trance. And back then, they didn't know what was happening. They didn't know the science behind alcohol and what it does to your brain. So they thought that was the gods talking to you and like speaking through your head, especially when you get into the idea of what's the Latin saying people say, in vino veritum, like in wine there is truth. So yeah, I think that people got it into their heads at some point that is a divine madness that that happens because people sometimes say things that are really profound or very, very truthful and that they wouldn't normally say. So it must be inspiration from the gods, right? Other than that, Dionysus also has like an association with drama. And so that I think this also somewhat has to do with the idea of madness and partying, because plays offer catharsis, like a public catharsis of we're all going to watch this and feel something. And so he kind of does have this almost dominion over, like emotion. I don't know to call it emotion because it's not every emotion. It's mostly just the partying emotions. Mm-hmm. But partying for good or for bad.
Well, and then the part that they talk about in Percy Jackson too is he has like your mental health, like your
yes,
like your lack of mental health sometimes, that
yes,
he's associated with that because that comes up a couple times, like many years apart. But it does come up that he's somebody associated with kind of like losing your mind in a way.
Yeah. A lot of the stories about him do involve him in, doing stuff like that. There's this whole play, I've been meaning to reread it, where it's basically his mortal family after his mom dies, denying that Dionysus is actually a god and that he's related to them and all of these things. And Dionysus really messes that family up by putting all of the women into a trance and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure some people have heard of the phrase Bacchic rites and stuff. Bacchus is another one of his names. And so this idea that there were like women who'd go and party naked out into the woods and stuff, that's associated with worship of him. And so, yeah, the idea that this out of like your head feeling you get in certain types of celebrations or public events and stuff, he's just deeply associated with.
Okay. The last one is Hades.
Yeah, and Hades doesn't have an official cabin in at least the first 5 books. So he is the god of the underworld and married to Persephone. Those are the 2 stories I've told so far. But there really isn't that much more to the guy, unfortunately. One thing I will say that I don't think enough people acknowledge is it's usually treated like he lost the whole drawing for, different dominions. But his dominion grows. The sky doesn't grow, the sea doesn't grow, but there will always be more dead people. And so I would even think that in some ways there is more power in that, but he's kind of treated like redheaded stepchild. I don't know if people still use that saying anymore. They used it when we were growing up, but they might not use it anymore. But the idea of this this person who's on the outs but still a part of the family that you like begrudgingly kind of let be around. Everybody thinks he's weird because the association with death. We see this played up in Percy Jackson. Really only shows up to the big events on Olympus because he's usually down in his kingdom. Yeah, there's really not much else to his personality and mythology.
Mm-hmm. He's usually the one that is seen as like the villain because people depicted him a lot as like a devil. That was one of my favorite things about the books when I first started reading them back in like 2010 was that he wasn't that and that his kids wasn't like the villain. It was refreshing because it was just like that was like always what they did. And so
Yes.
it was nice to see somebody else do something completely different.
Yeah, I mean, he's still a villain in the Rick Riordan world, and he kind of, I mean, a lot of the stuff that happened was his fault, but it's not in the way that he's a devil. And that's how you see him played up in Disney's Hercules, where, you know, he's even given a fiery aspect to him that doesn't necessarily make sense. Um, but yeah, people, because they conflate underworld with Christian hell, and then because they conflate it with Christian hell and he's the leader of it, he must be the devil. That's not necessarily how they thought about the afterlife. Everybody goes to the underworld. There are different sections of the underworld, but it's all the same underworld. And so he kind of resides over all of them. So theoretically, he resides over their heaven too. Their heaven, you know, we know it's the fields of the
Asphodel?
no, Asphodel's the normal place. It's the Elysium. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, he's one.
That's kind of their idea of heaven.
He's interesting. And I like his depiction in Percy Jackson because he does horrible things, but every god does. And so
Yes.
the things that he does are not worse than anyone else. It's just, he just is like everyone. Even if he is not like exempt from their BS just because he doesn't like them. Because
Yeah.
sometimes people, I see even fans do that, like think that he's not that bad, and I'm like, no, he's just as bad as everybody else. He just doesn't like talking to his brothers, but he's not actually better than them, really.
Yeah, he's opted out of the bullshit of the other Olympians by staying underground most of the time, especially in Percy Jackson lore. It's kind of what I think of it as is Poseidon and Zeus are the brothers that do not get along, always butt heads. And Hades, he also doesn't like either of them, but his way of dealing with that is like, I'm going to go off to college and never come back, versus, you know, the two that stay connected to the family.
Yeah, and like just to, because it's Rick Riordan who wrote these books, like family, like role wise, Hades is very much like the sibling that feels like they're forgotten, but also is the one that like isolates himself on purpose, and then
Yes.
blames all the like mistakes that he makes on his brothers instead of like thinking about the things that he did to cause these things to happen too. A couple other ones here and there, but they're not anyone that will show up on the TV show or anything like that in a big way that I feel like people need to be explained in order to understand what's going on. Those are the main ones, and there's maybe some people that will show up in like whenever we would get to like season 5 or something, but that's not for a couple years.
I think that's a good place to call it. We will see you guys next week and start The Lost Hero with us.